I never thought grief could be interrupted by something colder than death itself. But that's exactly what happened. My name is James. I'm 76 years old. And for 10 quiet years, I shared a peaceful coastal home with my wife, Clarice. We built a small life together. Soft mornings on the porch, slow jazz on Sunday evenings, and the kind of companionship that only comes with age. But the day she passed, her son, Malcolm, barely waited long enough for the funeral flowers to wilt before walking into my home like he owned it. At first, I thought it was grief speaking or maybe shock. But the way he looked around my living room, the way he called his mother's house, the way he ignored the fact that I paid every mortgage payment, something darker settled in. He talked to me like a tenant, like an intruder, like I was standing in a home I didn't belong to. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. But quietly, deep down, I felt something shift, a knowing that this wasn't confusion or loss. This was a plan. And Clarice, God bless her, knew something like this might come long before I ever did. Because a week later, I found the one thing she hid for a reason. I used to think silence was something you chose, something you created on purpose, a gift you gave yourself when the world got too loud. But after Clarice passed, I learned silence can also choose you. It can sit beside you at the breakfast table, follow you down the hallway, curl up in Clarice's old armchair, and whisper to you in a way that isn't comforting at all. It becomes a presence, almost like a second grief layered on top of the first. For a while, I tried to fill it with little routines. I'd open the curtains early, the way she used to like, letting the coastal light spill across the wooden floors of our lakeside cottage. I'd make myself a cup of tea, even though it never tasted the same without her humming softly in the kitchen. And then I'd sit on the porch, listening to gulls calling out over the water. That porch was our favorite place. We used to talk about everything out there, our days, her books, my old stories from work, the weather, even nothing at all. When two people are comfortable enough, even silence becomes a conversation. But now, silence was just silence. Heavy, still, unanswered. Clarice had been gone for only 3 weeks when her son, Malcolm, started showing up. I didn't mind at first. Grief affects everyone differently, and I thought maybe he needed connection. Maybe he needed to be in the house where his mother lived. Maybe he needed to feel her presence the way I still did. Everywhere, in the corners of rooms, in the faint scent of lavender she left behind, in the way the sunlight always fell across the piano she used to play on Sunday evenings. But his visits weren't like that. He didn't come with warm memories or gentle stories. He didn't ask how I was doing, or how I was eating, or whether I needed anything. No, he came with lists, observations, judgments. His voice had the tone of someone inspecting a rental property he wasn't sure he wanted to buy. The first time he arrived unannounced, I was sweeping the front porch. He walked up the steps like he owned the place, barely nodding in my direction. "Hey," he said flatly, "just checking on the house." The house. Not me. Not even Mom's house. Just the house, like it was an address or an investment. He didn't wait for an invitation. He stepped past me, opened the front door, and walked right in. For a second, my hand froze on the broom handle. The man didn't even wipe his shoes. I told myself to stay calm. He had just lost his mother after all, and I followed him inside. He walked through the living room, eyes scanning everything like he was measuring it. He opened Clarice's display cabinet, glanced at the framed photos, then shut it again with the exact kind of carelessness that would have made Clarice frown. I remember feeling something tighten in my chest, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. He moved from room to room, opening drawers, checking windows, flicking light switches. When I asked quietly, "Malcolm, is something wrong?" he waved me off like I was interrupting him during a meeting. "Just making sure the property is being maintained," he said. The property. That was the moment I felt the first crack. Not big enough to call a betrayal, but deep enough to know something wasn't right. Over the next week, he came 2 more times. No call ahead. No knock at the door. He'd just appear, sometimes tapping on the frame as he pushed the door open. sometimes not announcing himself at all. Every time, he walked through the house with that same detached expression, like he was inspecting damage after a storm. One afternoon, I was sitting in Clarice's old armchair with a book open on my lap when I heard footsteps behind me. I hadn't even heard the door open. Malcolm was standing there, staring at the piano with a look I couldn't quite describe. "You should probably sell that," he said. "Nobody plays it now." I shut the book slowly. "Your mother played it," I answered, "every Sunday. You know that." He shrugged. "It's old, and honestly, it's taking up space." I felt heat rise in my chest, but I kept my voice steady. "It's staying," I said simply. He didn't argue. He just smirked, a small, sharp smirk that lasted a second too long, and then walked into the hallway. That smirk stayed with me long after he left. It was a smirk of someone who believed he knew something I didn't, like he was waiting for me to figure it out, like this was the beginning of something he had already planned out in his head. I told myself not to jump to conclusions. Grief can twist people into versions of themselves they hardly recognize. But this didn't feel like grief. It felt like entitlement, like resentment, like he had been carrying old anger for years. Anger toward me for marrying his mother. Anger toward me for giving her a life she was happy in. Anger toward me for being in this house at all. Clarice once told me Malcolm struggled to let go of the past. She said it gently, the way she always did, with her hand resting on mine. "He'll come around one day," she'd whisper. "He just needs time." I always hoped she was right. I still hope she was right. The third time he showed up, I was in the kitchen washing dishes. I heard the front door open, followed by Malcolm's voice saying, "James? You home?" "I'm here," I called back. I dried my hands and walked into the living room. He was standing by the bookshelves, pulling one of my old photo albums halfway off the shelf before pushing it back in. "You know," he said without turning around, "Mom never should have had to take care of all this on her own." I blinked. "Take care of what?" He gestured vaguely. "The house, the chores, the finances, everything." I almost laughed, not out of humor, but disbelief. "Malcolm, I paid every bill in this house. I handled every repair. Your mother and I shared everything equally." He finally turned to look at me, his expression unreadable. "That's not what she told me." I felt my breath catch. "Clarice never said that. She talked to me about things," he insisted. "Stuff she didn't want to burden you with." I knew he was lying, or twisting something. Clarice never hid anything from me. She was the most honest woman I ever knew. But I didn't argue. Not yet. I just let the moment hang there, letting grief settle between us like dust in sunlight. He stepped past me without another word, moving toward the doorway, and that's when I saw it. A small white card slipped halfway out of his coat pocket. A realtor's card. My stomach tightened. I tried to steady my voice. "Malcolm," I said, "why do you have a realtor's card?" He froze for a fraction of a second, just long enough for his reaction to betray him, then casually pushed the card deeper into his pocket. "Oh, that?" he said with a dismissive laugh. "Nothing. Just someone Mom knew." It was a lie. A clean, easy lie. A lie he expected me to swallow. I watched him walk out the door, my heart beating slower but heavier, like each beat carried a question I didn't want to answer yet. For the first time since Clarice passed, I felt something colder than grief settle in my chest. Something was happening behind my back. Something he didn't want me to see. And it was only the beginning. I thought the hardest part would be the quiet. The empty chair, the shoes left by the door, the small rituals I performed beside Clarice for 30 years. I expected grief to be a steady, slow thing that settled into the house like dust. I did not expect the sharp, ridiculous way someone could try to erase you from your own life. Malcolm grew bolder with each visit. The first times he came around, he seemed tentative, like a man testing a house for cracks. Then, one afternoon, he arrived with a clipped tone and an air of business. He stood in the doorway and looked at me as if I were a tenant he'd come to inspect. "You can't stay here on your own, James," he said, as if this were settled fact. "You're too old to be climbing those stairs. It's dangerous." Clarice's stairs. I had climbed those stairs every day for years. I'd carried groceries up them. I'd danced on them once when she put a record on too loud and laughed when I stepped on her dress. To hear him call them dangerous felt like betrayal spoken in a small, careful voice. "I managed fine," I told him. My voice was firmer than I felt. The house was full of memories. The framed photos on the mantel, the little ceramic bowl near the sink she used for loose change, the tea towel with the faded pattern she'd insisted on using even when I begged her for something new. Those things were my proof that my life here had been built with love, not paper. Malcolm moved closer, and I watched his eyes take in the room, cataloging the evidence of my life here as though he were compiling an inventory. "Clarice wouldn't have wanted you to struggle," he said. "She would have wanted you to be safe. She would have wanted you to have help." I imagined Clarice hearing him and smiling that soft, skeptical smile she used when someone offered advice she hadn't asked for. "If being with someone makes you forget who you are," she used to say, "that is not help. That is replacement." He said, "The house wasn't really yours anyway," and I felt something small and brittle inside me break. The words were casual, tossed as if they were truth instead of manipulation. "Not really yours," he said, as if years of mortgage payments and maintenance and Sundays spent cooking together counted for nothing. I remember the exact color of the hand he used to smooth the paper he brought, an eviction notice he'd printed like a legal talisman. His hand was steady when he reached into his coat, and the sound it made as he opened the envelope etched itself into me more than his words did. "You need to let us help," he said. "Let me help. We can sell this place and find something smaller. Something you don't have to worry about." I thought of Clarice standing in our kitchen humming while she chopped onions, the way she glanced over and winked when the tears made my eyes sting. I thought of the mornings we spent on the porch watching the lake turn silver. I thought of the way she'd hold my hand when storms rolled up the coast and the house creaked. Selling this place wasn't about practicality. It was about handing over a life. What would you have done in my place? I found myself asking, not to him, but to the empty room that had kept our secrets. The question was a soft thing, an invitation for anyone listening to answer. I want to know if other people had the same stubbornness, the same mixture of pride and fear that made me sit in this living room and try to breathe with my whole chest when someone suggested I give it all up. Malcolm listened to me, but I could see his mind already skipping ahead, running through numbers and possibilities. He talked about estate plans and convenience, about the best outcomes for someone in my position. He used words that sounded like money: management, transfer, probate. Each one landed coldly, like coins in a bowl. They were abstract words with practical edges, the kind language people use when they've decided what they want and are ready to justify it. "You don't understand the paperwork," he said at one point, as if any confusion on my part proved my incapacity. There was the move from persuasion to dismissal. I'd always known how the world could be unkind to older people. I'd read those stories. I'd worked alongside men who retired to small apartments or nursing homes out of necessity or the illusion of convenience. But I had never thought it would be my son-in-law who would make me feel invisible. I tried to keep my cool. I made tea and offered it to him because it felt like something Clarice would have done. He took it without looking grateful, set it down in my living room, and began pacing to the conversation like a man rehearsing a play. "You're confused sometimes," he added casually. "The doctor said memory lapses can be common. Maybe this is a time to accept help." He said it in a way that folded concern into accusation. It was the kind of argument that sounds reasonable to anyone who doesn't know the person in front of them. If someone believes you're losing your grip on reality, it becomes easy to take the reins. I thought about the notes Clarice used to leave me, little reminders about appointments or when she wanted me to water the fern by the window. Those notes had been small ways we stayed connected. I still had them tucked in the pages of an old cookbook. I ran my finger over the ragged edges of one while Malcolm spoke, feeling the paper like a lifeline. When I stood up to leave the room for a moment, he moved closer to the mantel without asking. He picked up one of the framed photographs of Clarice and me on our wedding day and turned it in his hands, reading the inscription on the back as if it were a fact he could use. "You know," he said softly, half to the photo, half to me, "if the upkeep is too much, we could just put on market. It would sell. People love this neighborhood." Who would buy my memories? I asked. The question sounded foolish even to me. Memory isn't a commodity. It's a slow, stubborn presence that fills rooms and follows the people you share them with. He put down the photo, and for the first time I saw impatience flare across his face. Quick and ugly. "James, you're reacting emotionally. This is practical. Think about your safety." And then, like a punch that surprises because it comes with a smile, he handed me a printed sheet. I remember how the paper's edges fell under my fingers. Ordinary, clean, official. I didn't realize at first what it was. He didn't speak. He watched me with a look that seemed to say this was a reasonable next step. My hands trembled slightly as I read it. The document said something about tenancy termination and cited a signature that looked like mine, except it didn't. The last loop of the final letter curled oddly, a tiny difference that pricked at me like a splinter. The notice was dated only a week after the funeral. "You can see," he said, already rehearsing his version of concern. "We're doing this for your good." I remember thinking, absurdly, that Clarice would have laughed, hard and loud, if she could see the scene. She would have told Malcolm to sit down, to stop and eat, to remember that life isn't a spreadsheet. Instead, she was gone, and I held a piece of paper that smelled faintly of printer ink and false authority. My first instinct was denial. Someone had to have made a mistake. Maybe a clerk misfiled something. Perhaps a form had been filled incorrectly. Logic is a refuge, and I wanted to take cover there. But logic met paper, and paper bore a date. The signature, my signature, was there in black ink, clear and confident. My name, written down as though I had agreed to be evicted from the home I had paid for. I set the paper down gently on the coffee table, as if it were fragile, and looked at Malcolm. For the first time, I felt something else, an alarm that wasn't just about losing a house, but about the way people close to you can rationalize what they want by convincing themselves they are being kind. "Why would you do this?" I asked. My voice was small in the room that held our life. "Why would you print this and hand it to me?" He shrugged, as if shrugging could make it honest. "Because someone has to protect you from making bad choices." There was a silence that stretched long enough to be its own answer. Outside, a gull cried, and the lake glittered in the late afternoon. Inside, a life felt like a ledger, and I had been reduced to a line item. As I sat there, looking at that forged signature, I felt the room tilt just slightly. I had to choose what to do next. Challenge him, call the lawyer, demand proof, or let the slow grind of their plans take hold. My hands felt heavy with the weight of the decision. Malcolm watched me, his expression unreadable. His courtesy had a thin edge now, like something sharpened for effect. I knew, in that small, private way that comes from living beside someone for decades, that this was not merely about concern. It was about reclaiming something he felt had been denied to him. He had decided on a story. He would tell anyone who asked that he had rescued me, that he had done what was best for me because I could not. And some people would believe it, because it was easier to accept the narrative of care than to look at the paper and see the truth. I picked up the eviction notice and smoothed it flat on my knee. The curl in the signature that wasn't quite mine mocked me. I thought of Clarice's hands, strong and gentle, and how she used to press my palm and say, "We'll face things together." I realized then that I needed more than memory. I needed allies, paper my own, names of people who remembered us correctly. I needed proof that life was what I remembered it to be. But first, I had to confront what was sitting on the table between us. A printed, dated, and signed eviction notice that claimed I had agreed to leave. Malcolm's lips tightened. "We'll handle the logistics," he said. "You don't need to worry." I looked at him and felt a cold resolve rise up that matched the lake wind outside. I would not be dismissed that easily. I would not be erased. And I would not pretend to be surprised when he handed me something I knew in my bones had been forged. The next step, I thought, would be to find out who had written my name like that, and why. I found the envelope by accident in Clarice's sewing room, the small place she kept behind the kitchen where sunlight always fell soft on scraps of fabric. The room smelled faintly of lavender, and her scissors rested in a chipped teacup like a familiar face. I was moving a stack of patterns when something caught under the velvet lining of the jewelry box. It was taped there, hidden in a way that made me think she wanted it kept safe from anyone who might come looking. The envelope was brown and addressed in Clarice's looping hand, for James only. Inside, there was a short note and a small black USB drive. My fingers trembled as I unfolded her writing. Simple sentences, the kind she used when she wanted to be clear and kind all at once. "My love," she began, and then she wrote that if anything happened to her, I should plug the drive in and listen. She said she had seen the way people's faces change around money, and that she had hidden this for my safety. I am not proud to say I hesitated. Clarice used to tease me for preferring paper to screens, but this was not about technology. This was about trust. I found the old laptop and slipped the drive into the port. The drive's little light blinked, steady and small. For a moment I sat with my hands folded, as if prayer might steady me, and then I pressed play. She sat in our bedroom chair in the video, the one with a faded cushion where she always sat when she planned a dress. Her hair was pulled back. For a breath, I only watched her. The way she tilted her head, the soft line at the corner of her smile. Then she said my name, and it felt like Clarice stepping into the room. She began with memories. That swing on the back porch, Mr. Ellis's jar preserves, the recipe card tucked under the magazine rack. Those little things felt like anchors. Then her voice moved into something sharper. She told me there had been moments after the funeral when Malcolm had been too familiar, too quick to offer help, too eager to sort things out. She used the word pushy, and it landed in my chest like a small stone. Clarice explained why she had recorded the message. She said she had noticed how people sometimes wear concern like a cloak to hide other things. "If anyone tries to tell you the house isn't yours," she said, "look beneath the jewelry box. You'll find papers and this recording." She named the dresser, the cedar chest, an old envelope taped under velvet. Small, precise directions, not drama. Nothing theatrical. It was as if she'd made a map for me to follow. Her tone was practical and steady. She told me to call Mrs. Hargrove, the lawyer who'd come to church years back, to take the recording to the bank, to be brave. "You might want to avoid noise," she said gently. "Do the quiet things first. Let others show their faces. You show the truth." When she smiled, I felt the ordinary ache of missing someone who used to stand next to you in the kitchen and hand you a mug before the sun was up. Watching her, I felt a rush of relief mixed with new worry. Relief because she had seen this and made plans. Worry because if she had suspected it, how long had she watched the edges of our life for signs? What else had she kept to herself to protect me? Her foresight felt like an embrace and a warning. The video ended with her whispering, "Be brave." I rewound it and watched again, picking up details I hadn't noticed the first time. How she rubbed a ring on her finger the way she always did when she was thinking. The little dent on the dresser, where she kept her thimble. The name of the lawyer folded into a sentence. Each small thing was a breadcrumb Clarice had left, practical proof she intended me to find. I put the USB in my pocket, folded the note, and tucked both near my heart. The sewing room suddenly felt both intimate and like the place where a plan had been hatched. I smoothed the velvet in the jewelry box, as if I could tuck the secret back in for a while longer. Outside, the afternoon light softened on the porch. Inside, Clarice's voice lingered like a lamp left on. Clarice had given me more than evidence. She had given me quiet instructions and a permission to act. I found clarity in the order she suggested. Call the lawyer. Show the video if I needed to. Document every visit Malcolm made. She had given me names and places and the courage to refuse a charm that could be weaponized as care. Her carefulness steadied me. Her love felt like armor. Still, even with instructions, there was that small, pointed worry. Now that the secret was found, who would move first? Would Malcolm sense that the cover had been lifted and try to rush the paperwork? To stage a show? Or would he falter when the truth met him face to face? Clarice had prepared me, but she had not promised the outcome. She had always preferred to plan and let life reveal itself slowly. I thought about how often love is measured in small mercies and how greed disguises itself as care. Malcolm's voice had always been loud enough to drown out quiet things, and I fear that my own hesitation might have made space for that loudness to claim what was ours. Clarice's video, with its careful instructions, felt like a way to answer the loudness without matching it. She had given me the permission to be firm and the exact places to look, so I would not be accused of grasping at rumor. There is a physical comfort to being prepared. I made a list. The dresser drawer where Clarice kept receipts, the cedar chest with a hollow bottom, the lawyer who remembered Clarice from church luncheon years ago, photographs with dates on the back. I promised myself I would document everything, visits, notes, photos of anything Malcolm moved, because paper is stubborn against lies. Clarice believed in the stubbornness of paper. For weeks before the funeral, Malcolm had hovered like a shadow at the edge of our life, offering to take care of small tasks. He would mow the lawn and then linger by the mailbox watching the postal carrier. He brought over casseroles and lingered in conversation, as if assessing what he could claim. Once he started leaving business cards folded into coat pockets or mentioning a realtor in casual sentences, I began to realize his concern came with a different currency than I thought. Clarice had seen that, and she had acted to guard me. Late that evening, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea and listened to the quiet. The moon had not yet risen, and the porch light painted the garden in a soft pool. I thought of how Clarice had always chosen to resolve things gently, never raising her voice unless it was necessary. She had arranged this for me in her usual way, practical, careful, loving. There was no showmanship in it, only a fierce desire to protect the life we built together. When I turned the key in the old lock and closed the door, the weight of the small USB felt lighter because it was no longer a mystery. It had her face on it. It had her voice telling me plainly what to do. That was courage of a peculiar kind. The ability to prepare someone to outlast the small ambitions of others without descending into bitterness. As I folded the note again and smoothed the envelope, I felt that Clarice had given me something beyond evidence. She had given me a way to act like the man she believed I was. The thought steadied me. I would gather proof, speak with Mrs. Hargrove, and when the time came, present what I had with the calmness she instructed. For now, I kept the USB close and let the house breathe around me, knowing that the next move would not be made by me alone. I touched the quilt Clarice had stitched and felt a thread catch under my thumb, a tiny snag that needed mending. It seemed fitting somehow. Life would have small repairs even after this. I walked to the table with the USB in my hand, feeling the steadiness of purpose she had left behind. The next steps were clear enough to begin. Gather the papers, document, call the lawyer, and be brave. Even so, my heart kept a small, cautious question. When I walked up to Malcolm next, how would he look when the truth found him? Would his face go pale, or would he try to smile through it? Clarice's recording had given me a starting line. The race, if you could call it that, would soon begin. I sat there in the dim quiet of Clarice's sewing room, my hands still resting on the laptop where her face had faded from the screen. Even after the video ended, the room didn't feel empty. It felt like she had stepped out only for a moment, maybe to get thread or warm her hands by the stove. That was always her way. Leave a softness behind, even in the hardest conversations. And yet, there was nothing soft about what she had revealed. I pressed play again, letting her voice carry through the room like a steady chord. There was a point in the recording where she leaned in a little closer, where the light caught the moisture in her eyes. That's where she spoke about Malcolm. Quietly, directly, without bitterness. "James," she said, her voice steady, "my boy has always believed the world owed him something. But the truth is, he's a man who never learned the difference between inheritance and entitlement." Hearing her say it wasn't surprise. Clarice always saw more than she let on. But listening to her name out loud, that hit different. She knew what Malcolm was capable of. She knew he might twist grief into a weapon and use it against the closest person to her. And she had been preparing for that long, before I ever understood what was shifting under my feet. In the video, she reached off-screen and lifted a folder, one I recognized from the cedar chest she kept at the foot of our bed. "I updated the deed," she said, tapping the folder lightly. "Everything is in your name, James. Not joint, not partial yours." Her lips trembled, but she didn't let her voice break. "The house, the land, the savings. I made sure you'd never have to fight for what you built with your hands." My breath caught, the way it does when a truth is heavier than you expect. I remembered those long summer months when I rebuilt the porch, and she kept bringing me lemonade. I remembered painting the bedroom walls. Her choosing the soft green, she said, reminded her of spring before she got sick. I remember her turning off the lamp every night, touching my shoulder before sliding into bed. She hadn't done any of this out of suspicion. She had done it out of love. Then came the part where she warned me. "If Malcolm tries anything, he'll start with the county office. He'll say the house always belonged to me alone. He'll claim you're a renter or a temporary resident. He'll even forge my signature if he thinks it'll give him what he wants." She paused then. Her eyes tightened the way they used to when she was trying not to let pain show. "Please don't confront him. Not yet. Gather what you need. Protect yourself quietly." She was giving me a blueprint, calm, clean steps. She had always been practical like that. I stopped the video a third time and let the quiet settle over me. The house creaked softly as the afternoon cooled. Dust floated in the sunbeam cutting across the sewing table. For a long moment I just sat, fingers pressed to the corner of the laptop, letting her instructions sink in. Then I did exactly what she told me. I went to the cedar chest first. The lid groaned open with that low wooden sigh I'd heard 100 times. Inside, folded beneath some quilts her mother had sewn, was a folder Clarice held in the video. I lifted it carefully, the edges crisp, protected from years of wear. I brought it to the dining table, a solid oak piece I'd refinished a year before, and laid everything out flat. The updated deed was there, signed, notarized, stamped. She hadn't left a single corner vulnerable. Clarice had attached a letter from her lawyer, confirming the transfer and citing the marriage laws that protected spousal rights. Everything was clean, above board, ironclad. The will was in its own sleeve. I opened it slowly, as if turning the pages too quickly would dishonor her care. Her handwriting at the bottom, it was firm, familiar, unshaken. She had listed everything she wanted me to have, from a home to the account we shared to the personal things. She said, "Only James understands the meaning of—" I felt my throat tighten, not from grief, though that was there, humming quietly beneath everything, but from gratitude. Clarice had trusted me with the pieces of her life long, before death put them into my hands. The last documented piece was a notarized statement, one I hadn't known existed. She had written it in case Malcolm ever contested anything. It read, "My husband, James Rivers, has contributed financially to and maintained our home for over 20 years. No one has a right to claim or remove him from this residence. This is my explicit wish." Her signature was unmistakable. Clarice always darted her eyes with the faintest upward flick, like she was lifting the letter into the air. Malcolm could forge many things, but he could never mimic that flick. I gathered everything into a neat stack. Then I did something Clarice would have done herself. I made duplicates. 3 sets. One for the lawyer, one to keep hidden, one to carry with me. The printer hummed steadily, filling the house with a familiar mechanical rhythm. As each page slid out, crisp, unmarred, I felt a kind of power settle into my chest. Not vengeance, not fury, just certainty. Certainty can be stronger than anger. Clarissa believed in that, in the quiet kind of strength that doesn't need an audience. After I made the files, I organized them into labeled folders, sliding plastic sleeves over anything important. The sewing room light was dimming. I turned on the lamp, its golden glow settling on my hands, warm and steady. Clarice loved that lamp. She said it made the room feel like a sanctuary. Tonight, it felt like she was sitting beside me, guiding my hands. When I was done, I reached for my old leather-bound address book, the one Clarice always joked I'd keep even if the whole world went digital. Inside, written in her tidy script on a small sticky note, was a name, Mr. William Porter, family attorney. She must have written it long before she recorded the video. She must have known I'd need someone who wasn't afraid to navigate family matters with calm hands. I dialed the number. He answered on the third ring, his voice low and polished. I introduced myself, reminded him gently who I was, James Rivers, Clarissa's husband. There was a pause, a soft inhale. "I'm very sorry for your loss," he said. Even through the phone, his voice had a weight to it. Then he added quietly, "Clarice prepared for more than her passing. I'm glad you called." We scheduled a meeting for that afternoon. Before I hung up, he asked if I had the document she referenced. "Yes," I said, touching the folders with my fingertips. "I have everything she left." "Good," he replied. "You'll need them. Malcolm has already filed a claim through the registrar. He's trying to override the deed." My heart stilled, not from fear, but from the confirmation that Clarice had known him well enough to anticipate his first move. And now he had made it. I hung up slowly, letting the words settle in the quiet house. Clarice had left me a roadmap. Malcolm had already taken his first step, and now it was my turn. I gathered the folders and placed them gently into my briefcase, the same one Clarice had bought me years ago for an anniversary I nearly forgot. The zipper closed smoothly, the metal teeth clicking together like a final promise. The house felt different now, not threatened, not lonely, prepared. And as I turned off the sewing room light, a soft calm settled in me. The same calm Clarice had passed on through every detail she left behind. I walked down the hallway, the weight of the truth steady in my hands, and felt the first quiet stirrings of resolve rise in my chest. Tomorrow, everything would begin, and tonight I would rest, because Clarice had armed me well. They came at me the way storms come after a long, dry summer, sudden, loud, and somehow carry more confidence than sense. I remember the morning light sliding across the kitchen table, the same light Clarice loved, and how ordinary that day felt until it wasn't. The attorney had sent a letter the night before, stamped and official, saying Malcolm's claim had been examined and that the video and deed Clarice left would be admitted as evidence. I read it slowly, folding the paper the way she used to fold letters she wanted to save, and for the first time in weeks I let myself breathe. But the relief was thin. Paper and courtrooms had a way of making things civilized on paper, while the people involved kept their tempers in their pockets and their plans in the shadows. That's when William told me to be ready. They don't always stop when you give them proof, he said, voice steady like a man who'd walked through enough family storms to know the patterns. They're more dangerous when they feel backed into a corner. So I spent the day doing small, practical things. I called a friend to come by in the afternoon. I moved crucial papers into a locked briefcase and put that briefcase in the closet under a stack of quilts Clarice had sewn. I wiped my fingerprints from the top of the piano, not because anyone could prove anything by them, but because I liked to keep my hands tidy when the world felt messy. Small rituals help you believe you still govern your life. When the lawyer and I met, he sat with his hands folded, and we walked through every document like a careful gardener pruning a tree. He explained the legalese in plain terms, which is something I always appreciated. He made me feel the strength of what Clarice had done, and that steadied me more than anything else did. Malcolm is entitled, he said, and entitlement is not the same as right. He smiled a little at that, as if the distinction were a small satisfying truth to savor. Despite the lawyer's assurance, I couldn't shake the feeling that entitlement is an emotion with muscle behind it. It can gather people, gather furniture, gather movers, and act like law if the law is slow. So I made a quiet plan of my own. Be present, be visible, and let nothing surprise me. I told a neighbor that if anyone came by, to call the attorney. I left the porch light on at night, and the radio tuned low to the classical station Clarice liked. It was small defiance, the kind that helps you keep your center. Late that afternoon, I was in the yard, clipping a rose bush Clarice had planted the spring we moved in. I had always liked roses the way they survive. Thorns, sure, but they still lift their faces to the sun. I heard a truck before I saw it. The kind of vehicle that carries boxes and promises in equal measure. When I looked up, there were men in matching shirts moving boxes under the direction of a man who wore a face like he'd rehearsed it. Polite, worldly, and impatient all at once. Malcolm stood beside them, hands in his pockets, wearing a jacket that looked a size too important for his frame. He caught my eye and smiled, like this was a reunion. "James," he said, voice ringing out over the grass. "I gave you enough time." There was a smoothness to his statement, as if he'd practiced delivering it with the inevitability of someone making a weather report. The movers, alert and efficient, moved with methodical purpose. One of them hefted a lamp Clarice had loved. Another carried a stack of framed photos down the porch steps. Watching them lift pieces of our life felt like watching the slow turning of pages in a book someone else had stolen the right to read. I set the shears down and walked up the path with the quiet determination of a man who has been patient because he believed in decency. Clarice had always said patience is a muscle. You have to use it or it withers. I approached Malcolm slowly, and the men briefly paused, like pets sensing an unwelcome scent. "Malcolm," I said, keeping my voice even. He came forward, hand outstretched the way someone offers a business card, the way he'd offered to help with the funeral arrangements as if preparing a show. "James," he said, as if there were nothing to explain. "I thought it best to start clearing things out. We all agreed you'd be moving to the smaller place, remember? For your own good. The house is complicated to maintain." He said, "We all agreed," the way people say we all agreed when there is really only one person doing the agreeing and the rest are roped along by convenience. I felt the old sting of being talked down to, the same smallness shoved into me years before when he first stepped into our lives. But I had Clarice's folder in my head, her face on the video, the firm click of the notary stamp. Those things kept my voice from wavering. "I haven't agreed to anything," I said. "Clarice left the house to me." Malcolm's smile didn't change, only the tilt of his head. "You know how these things go, James. Lawyers, paperwork, it's all slow. We can make it simple for you." There was again the assumption that my life could be simplified without my consent, like a dish cleared from a table while the guest is still eating. I thought of Clarice's hands, how she would tighten a screw or smooth a seam until the job was done right. I felt that quiet pride swell inside me, more powerful than anger. I had lived a life making things right. I would not let anyone make it wrong. "How do you have movers?" I asked. "Who authorized this?" He looked momentarily surprised at the question, as if that logistical detail were beneath his notice, and then his eyes hardened with a flash I recognized from years of small cruelties. "I hired them," he said. "I'm making arrangements. You could be difficult, James, but I'm doing what needs to be done." He didn't say it loud, but something in his tone suggested he thought he was doing everyone a favor. That entitlement can sound very much like charity. The movers continued, moving from room to room, carrying boxes labeled in a handwriting that didn't belong to Clarice. Behind him, a neighbor had stepped onto her porch and was watching, eyes wide. She must have called the attorney. I had asked her to keep an eye out. My phone buzzed in my pocket. The lawyer's assistant, probably checking in. I kept my face steady and pulled the phone out. The screen lit with a message. "Stay calm. We're on our way." William had the rhythm of urgency, without panic. It steadied me. I turned back to Malcolm. "These items aren't yours," I said, softer now, because harshness feeds spectacle, and I didn't want a spectacle. I wanted the truth to have room to breathe. He shrugged. "It's only temporary," he said. "We'll sort it out. Don't make this harder." His hands had grown quick then, the way someone who is used to taking will act when they feel a window of opportunity. He pointed to a box where the movers had placed a small silver tray Clarice used for tea. "We're moving the heavy things first," Malcolm said. "You can take whatever you want later, James." I could see the outline of his plan now. Make it a fait accompli, shove the grief forward into action, and count on people's reluctance to cause a scene. If you make the consequence of resistance too inconvenient, many people will bow. It is why silence is dangerous and why Clarice had recorded what she did. Inside, my hands shook a little, the way they do when a memory of a well-loved routine returns. I thought of the video, of the way Clarice had spoken into the camera like a person making a promise. I thought of the deed, crisp in my briefcase back in the house. These were the guardrails between right and wrong. One of the movers set down a small wooden box, and the lid popped open, revealing a scattering of old letters and a locket. I recognized it. The locket Clarice wore every day, the one she never took off. It sat among other things like a heart on the table, and something in me contracted with the shot of seeing it treated as cargo. "Give that back," I said, and there was now an edge in my voice I hadn't meant to reveal. It was not loud, only precise. A man carrying a framed photograph looked my way, uncertain. He handed it to another mover, who set it on a stack of boxes. Malcolm flashed a small, impatient look. "We don't have time for theatrics," he said. "This needs to be done." He thought speed would outpace truth. He thought boxes could bury history. Down the street, a car slowed. I saw William step out, sleeves rolled, face weathered but purposeful. Behind him, another figure approached. The neighbor I'd asked to keep watch, breathless and determined. There was an energy gathering like tidewater. I stood in the doorway and watched the men move. Each folded quilt, each frame lifted, felt like a small casualty. But there was also a confidence building in me I hadn't felt until that moment, a quiet test of the resilience Clarice had shown me every day of our life together. The movers paused as William spoke, voice low and firm. A conversation began, then rose, then held. I couldn't hear all the words, only the cadence, law meeting entitlement, calm answering force. Then the neighbor stepped forward, hand pressed her chest, and said something sharp. Malcolm's face went a color I don't often see, the color of someone learning they might have overreached. He straightened, and for a moment I thought perhaps reason would arrive. Perhaps the sight of the attorney and the neighbor would temper the entitlement like a wind that cools a fever. For an instant the world recalibrated. Then Malcolm called one of the movers, and his voice carried on the yard. "I gave you enough time." It wasn't a plea. It wasn't an explanation. It was a verdict pronounced before the hearing. A line drawn in the sand with no regard for the law that had been set out like a lighthouse in the hazy water of his plans. I felt the quiet in me settle into a resolve that had nothing to do with rage and everything to do with dignity. Clarice had built that care into the seams of our life, and now it held me steady. The attorney walked up the path, files clasped under his arm, and his face was a map of purpose. Behind him, the neighbor kept watch like a sentinel. The movers, who had been confident minutes before, now moved with new awareness, like men whose workday had been interrupted by an argument larger than their paycheck. I looked at Malcolm, then at the house, then at Clarice's locket lying at the center of the scattered belongings. I felt the weight of the morning tilt in a way that suggested this moment was not an ending, but an opening, a chance to let truth do its slow, its patient work. He had shown his mask. He had revealed the entitlement behind it, and now everyone could see. I turned the TV on because I wanted the light and the sound to fill the room the way Clarice's humming always had. There was a softness in the air, dust motes drifting through the late afternoon sun, a teacup waiting on the table where she once set down a book. Malcolm stood in the doorway like a man who had expected applause for his plans. The movers clustered behind him with boxes and blank faces. The attorney hovered by the hallway, a quiet presence, and the neighbor stood near the doorway. When the video began, Clarissa's voice came through the speakers, like someone stepping into the kitchen where you thought she'd been all along. She looked at the camera with that exact, gentle focus she used when she wanted to make sure I heard her. She spoke plainly about the house, about us, and about what she wanted when she could no longer speak for herself. She called me by a nickname she had used only on Sunday mornings, the kind of name that fits in warm sunlight. Hearing her say it made something inside me rearrange into gratitude. She told the camera that she had updated the deed and that she had left the house to me because she trusted me to keep the place the way she had kept it. She explained in the gentle rhythm she used for sewing instructions why she had taken care to make it clear. Not because she wanted to deny Malcolm, but because she wanted me to be safe, quiet, and honor in the home we had built together. Her words were short and exact, and she laughed softly at the memory of how stubborn I could be about where to hang a picture or how to fold a blanket. There is a power in seeing the person you love address a room that has become your courtroom. Clarissa's face on the screen was both tender and firm. She had thought it through. She mentioned the lawyer's name, the notary, the dates, small details that are like iron nails in a plan. I watched Malcolm's expression change. At first, he tried to look unconcerned, the way men sometimes do when the ground tilts under them. Then his jaw tightened. The movers shifted their weight. My neighbor's hand found mine and squeezed for a second. That small human thing steadied me. After the video, I lifted a manila envelope from the coffee table and laid the certified copy of the updated deed on top for everyone to see. The paper was thick and official, the notary stamp clear as a coin. William, my neighbor, gave a small nod to the attorney, and the attorney stepped forward as if he were completing a ceremony. He explained, simply and without flourish, that the deed was valid and that Clarissa's intent had been recorded properly. He said the video corroborated her state of mind and the timing of her decision, and he pointed to the signatures and the notarization, as if linking the past to the present with small, decisive gestures. Malcolm's face drained of color, like paint being rinsed. He had rehearsed entitlement, but not clarity. The movers looked at one another, suddenly awkward custodians of someone else's history. For a moment, no one spoke. The silence was a kind of accounting where every unfairness arranged itself into balance. "You did this for me?" I asked quietly, not because I needed reassurance, but because Clarissa's meticulous care still surprised me with its reach. She had always done small, practical things that felt like love, folding the napkins a certain way, leaving an extra blanket on the armchair. The realization of care, delivered after death, felt like a blessing and a little like being held. Malcolm stumbled through an apology that smelled of rehearsed regret. "I didn't know," he said, but the words fell thin against the weight of the documents. The attorney, with a professional calm, explained that Malcolm's eviction notice and the forged signature had no force when set against Clarissa's deed and that the law would protect what she had declared. He said the forged notice would be treated as evidence of wrongdoing, and his voice was the kind that made people see the paperwork instead of the drama. The movers packed back into the truck with quiet reluctance, the sound of the engine like a closing curtain. There was no shouting. I suppose that is what people expect. A scene, accusations flung like confetti, the kind of noise that makes everyone feel they have taken part. But Clarisse had never liked shouting. She treated life like one stitches a quilt, carefully, with mind toward warmth. I felt her method work on my behalf, quiet, precise, and inexorable. The men with boxes left with their work undone in a way that made them look unsettled. Entitlement does not always travel well with being checked. When the house was still, the sound measured itself differently. The tick of the kitchen clock, the soft sigh of the heater, the small creak of the floor under my feet. These were the instruments of domestic life, and they sounded like welcome. I moved through rooms and touched things with the reverence of someone walking through a museum that belongs to them. Clarisse liked to arrange the cushions just so. I straightened one, and was surprised at how much that small act steadied me. Her smell, faint and linen-like, seemed to linger in the curtains. It is an odd consolation to find that ordinary details survive grief and make a home feel like a home again. I sat at our kitchen table with a cup of tea, the flavor quiet and true, and placed Clarice's handwritten letter on the mantel, where she used to keep her essential notes. The letter was thin and slightly smudged at the edges from the way she had handled it. I read it again, though I had heard her on the video, because hearing had been public and seeing the ink was private. She had written that she wanted me to be safe, that she trusted me with the house, that she wanted no drama on my account. The letter smelled faintly of the perfume she wore on our wedding day, the scent folded into the paper the way a photograph can hold a light. People ask me sometimes what revenge feels like. I think they imagine fireworks. For me, it felt like justice done without spectacle, a settled thing. Malcolm's humiliation was not something I delighted in. It was an inevitable result of someone mistaking greed for entitlement. I felt compassion for the lostness that leads a person to think they own someone else's life because of a bloodline or a perceived right. And yet, I felt a firm peace, like the one you get at the end of a long day when a house is as it should be and the kettle has been put away. I called William to thank him. Friends stand when it matters. The neighbor brought over a small lemon cake with extra icing, the kind Clarice used to prefer for no particular reason, but because she liked the sugar along the edges. We ate quietly on the porch while the day slid into a soft blue evening. My hands had work to do, bills, calls, the lawyer's letters, practicalities that Clarice had always managed so well. It was ordinary work, the kind that roots a life back into its day-to-day shape. There was comfort in that. Later, as night crept in and the house settled into its familiar rhythms, I stood in the living room and looked around. The TV was off, the video stored safely away, and Clarice's voice lived in my memory like an old song. I opened a drawer where we kept small tokens, ticket stubs, receipts, the odd note, and I pulled out something I'd forgotten, a small scrap of fabric from a dress she had worn the summer we married. It smelled faintly of lavender. I pressed it to my face and let the memory of her press back. I placed Clarice's letter on the mantel in a frame and leaned against the piano, which held her photograph and a small ceramic bird she loved. "Thank you, sweetheart," I whispered, because gratitude is a kind of prayer and because I meant every word. Her protection had been thoughtful and practical. Not spectacles of fury, but a careful closing of the doors against those who would have made trouble. The house felt protected in a way that had very little to do with locks and everything to do with intention. Before I went to bed, I walked through each room and switched off the lamps one by one, feeling for the familiar cadence of the house. When I reached the bedroom, I paused by the window and watched the moon lift. It felt like an old friend returning. The world outside was large and full of 1,000 lives, but inside these walls there was a quietness I had earned and Clarice had secured for me. I sleep knowing the house holds our story, that Clarice's care continues to keep me steady, and that small truths can do the heaviest lifting each night. I sleep grateful for her love. If this story touched you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop a single word in the comments. Maybe tell me where you're watching from or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.